Welcome to Don't Say Adulting. It's the show where we seek out advice from friends, family, and professionals on the daily tasks of adulthood. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Don't Say Adulting. Today, not only do we have a special guest today, we also have a special co-host today. I'm joined by Becky Rogers, our art director here at Grotto, and our resident plant person interested in plants. Not an expert.
Not an expert. Just someone who likes plants.
Yeah, where's the interest for plants for you begin?
The first time I brought a plant home was back in 2019, and there was a extremely struggling fiddle leaf fig plant, which for us watchers, there's a fake one right behind us.
I mean, it's real as far as they know.
Yeah, sure. Notes on fake plants later. But it was dying. It was just on its way out, not doing well. I believe it belonged to our boss hobby, and it was just forgotten about in a windowsill in our office for a while, and I was like, can I take this home?
Can I revive this?
Can I? And to bring a plant up from a state of it not doing well, or I don't know, just seeing the growth that can happen in them. So yeah, that's kind of where it started, and from there you kind of just gather more, or even without propagating or any you just kind of oh, there's a plant that looks nice, so I guess I'll take that home with me, or sometimes I've gotten them given to me or anything. So you kind of just learn to take care of them individually. They all kind of have their own special needs, and yeah, it's really fulfilling to see them flourish and grow, and have just enjoyed that process. So
yeah,
I would not say I'm an expert on plants by any means.
But you're ready to learn more.
I know. I'm ready to learn more. I'm ready to take my knowledge to the next level. Yeah. So.
Yeah. And for those of you who didn't read the title of this episode before clicking it and are wondering why we're talking about plants, it's because today's episode is about plants. How do you keep them alive? That's my main question, because I don't know how. I don't know how to do it. Becky just told a beautiful story about bringing a fig tree back to life. But I've tried a few. I think what drives the interest for me is it seems like a relatively affordable and simple way to brighten up what can often be, when you're younger, you're living in apartments that you're renting, that you can't really make too many changes to, college dorm rooms, whatever it is. It seems like a plant can really go a long way. Mm-hmm. So I'd really like to keep one alive.
But you haven't yet?
Yeah. What do you think for you so far has been the thing that has made it somewhat successful, even though you're not an expert? All right.
I would say the top two things that I have learned is that to understand your lighting conditions and knowing different types of plants different types of light, not to get too specific about that, but some prefer really direct south facing windows where they're getting super bright sunlight all day. Others are fine just in a indirect corner where it's not getting as much. So kind of learning, and that's the fun part of having plants too, is I don't know, you kind of have to be able to evaluate it, say are you doing well here, how are you doing in this little spot, are you thriving, are you not looking so good? So right now I'm in a house where there's not a ton of good south facing light, so I kind of have to work with what I have, and so yeah, that's probably my number one thing that I've learned is just the lighting. And then the second thing is the watering is not kind of I'm going to be on a specific schedule of I'm going to water this every single week, and I'll water every single one of my plants at the same time, because just like lighting, different plants like different amounts of water. Yeah. And I've kind of learned more it's better to kind of just do a little check-in with your plants maybe every week or every few days.
Yeah, where, ask how they're doing.
Yeah, just say, hey buddy, how you doing?
What's going on?
No, but just kind of I think as long as you're checking in on them, understanding different lighting conditions, and then knowing that the cause of death from any plants can either be underwatering or overwatering, and that's what makes it confusing. So just
figuring out
that time. And I have killed plants before. There are some that I'm just not good at keeping alive, but you do kind of start to get your favorites
Yeah.
too when you start building a collection. And
Oh,
yeah.
yeah. Well, hopefully our guest today can help us. I mean, help me out mostly. Sounds like you got a lot covered. But today we've got Benjamin Futa on, who owns Botany here in South Bend. And I'm really excited to talk to him because he's got a few things online that I watch. He's given some talks on plants and gardening. So I think it'll be a pretty fun episode. So for all you guys listening, please stick around. Please.
Please.
Stay tuned for more Don't Say Adulting. Welcome back to Don't Say Adulting. We are now joined by our very special guest, Ben Futa from Botany, or the Botany Shop. And he's here to talk about plants, how to keep them alive. He's going to show me how to make my space look nice, hopefully. How are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so what exactly is the Botany Shop and what do you do there? What inspired it?
So the Botany Shop is we call it a place for plant lovers of all experiences. We are primarily an indoor plant shop, though we do occasionally bring in some outdoor plants, mostly native plants when we can. We also feature about 20 plus local makers in the shop right now as well. And so those are people, creating, art and gifts and ceramics. So things that are sort of botanically infused or plant adjacent, as we like to say. But the whole notion of the Botany Shop is it's sort of a beginning, a wedge into something bigger, but this idea that we want to empower more people to grow more plants in more places. And so what does that look like? It's about, it spans a lot of things, but it's, matchmaking first and foremost. So where do you want to grow plants? Let's match the plant to that, but also what's your speed? What's your lifestyle? People like to come in and say, well, I've killed everything. I'm like, well, tell me what you've killed and how it's died. Like, let's do a postmortem, because if you've only killed calatheas, that's completely understandable. They're divas. Or if you kill succulents, then maybe you're an overwaterer. So you need a calathea because you like to love on your plants. So, for us, it's not just about, oh yeah, here's a pretty green thing. Plants are alive. And so how we do that matchmaking thinks a lot about their speed as much as your speed.
Okay. Yeah, Becky and I were talking about the balancing for water, what that looks like, and the over-loving of certain plants.
Yes, or under-loving. And again, there's a plant for everybody. That's the thing.
Okay, yeah. See, I'm under the impression that I can't keep any plant alive. Although I do have a little succulent adjacent thing that's coming along somewhat. What do you think are, well, I guess first, what ignited your interest in plants? You kind of got into it a little bit with the growing, but... Totally.
So I've been gardening my entire life, actually. So... my parents like to say the first word I learned to spell before mom and dad was iris. They were my favorite flower as a kid. And I just sort of, grew up gardening around what I like to call enablers. So people that sort of recognized that I liked plants and were like, oh, go do that over here so you don't mess up what we have over here. And then eventually I just, would sort of expand and take over every inch that I could. Went to college and undergrad for public horticulture, so specifically working in public gardens. Botanical gardens actually have been my life up until the Botany Shop. So I have about a decade working in effectively what we call living museums. So, these are places that collect plants for the benefit of our natural and cultural commonwealth. These are plants that tell stories, just like any museum would, an art museum, history museum, a zoo, an aquarium. They all have objects. Ours just happen to be alive. So we've tried to bring a lot of that ethos into the Botany Shop. So doing storytelling, thinking about curation in a strong way. Again, we don't really want to bring a plant in or send a plant home with somebody if they're not ready for it or if it doesn't feel like a good match. We're less concerned about making the sale and more concerned about setting people up to be successful. And I think a lot of that comes from sort of our public garden background.
All right. Okay, so let's bring it back to the basics a little bit.
Yes.
This was one of the questions that felt dumb when I was writing it, but I was like, if I'm wondering it, maybe other
You're
people
not
are
alone.
too.
Yes.
How often should you water a plant?
Depends on the plant.
Okay.
Yes.
Moving on. No. So you wouldn't say that there's an average that most plants need?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And a lot of times watering, comes down. Basically, the biggest rule of thumb I think I could say is listen to what your plants are telling you. Mm-hmm. Don't go based on a calendar. Calendars are not, just like us. It's like, well, I don't need to go to the grocery store this week. I still am good on food. I don't need to go buy more food right now. I can wait 2 or 3 more days. Plants work a lot in the same way, where again, it's like during the summer, they may dry out more quickly because the air is warmer, potentially drier, depending on where you have it. So it may need to, and it's growing quicker, so it's using more water. But in winter, the days are shorter. It just maybe doesn't dry out quite as quickly. So a lot of times their leaves will tell you if they, certainly if there's like a drooping leaf somewhere, that's a sign that it probably needs a drink. But the easiest way is just to stick your finger in the soil and see what it's telling you. If there's moisture in the top 2 inches of soil, pretty much no matter what it is, just don't water. Like, it's not ready yet. But if it's dry within about those top 2 inches, it needs a drink.
Okay. Are there different signs for different needs? Like, can you tell if a plant needs light versus water?
Yes. Typically, water is going to have a drooping effect. So again, you're going to or sort of it's going to look pruny, like your fingers after they've been wet for too long. Succulents are a really good example of sort of the pruny dehydration. So as they dry out, they store a lot of water in their leaves as a survival mechanism. And as they use up that water, they just constrict. And so that's when they'll start to look kind of shriveled. If you pinch them and they're soft or kind of flimsy, that's another sign they need water. But if they're nice and sort of taut and firm, they don't need any water. So they're like good to go. Even if you watered them 2 weeks ago, if they're still nice and plump, don't just let them, just ignore.
Okay.
Yep.
So I kind of usually space it out I'm not going to water my plants every week, but I might check on them once a week. So you're someone who's constantly around plants. That's what you do all the time. Is there a general rule of thumb that you would suggest for someone like Jane or I who have anywhere between a couple to maybe 20 plants that you would say, oh, this is how often you should check on them?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think once a week is sort of a good routine. And again, yeah, definitely for the checking, because you should be checking for pests if you see, and you don't have to be the world's best expert on, well, that's a mealybug and that's an aphid. Just basically paying attention to if something changed and if something changed rapidly, because that's being proactive and being sort of ahead of the curve is what's going to help you and help your plant. If it sits for 2 months and then you come back to it and you're like, oh, it's covered in a bunch of white stuff, I don't know what that is. It's probably too late, or it's too far gone. So part of it's just being present and being aware of, again, what's happening with your plants. So even if they don't need water, even if they don't need, a lot of times what you can do is also rotate them. So just give them a 180 turn. Succulents, again, typically don't need that every week, but some of the tropical plants, they grow so quickly, they will pivot towards the light pretty rapidly. So that turning helps to keep them growing up and straight rather than all leaning to one side.
Okay. So we're going through a lot of different types of plants here. Are there any that for beginners specifically you would recommend, whether that's indoor or outdoor? Is one of those actually even easier? You know?
And that's the other thing, indoor plants, even the ones that, as I like to say, thrive on neglect, because there are a few that will.
That's me.
Even,
No, it's not.
even those plants still need us at some point, so even, if I say, well, this plant thrives on neglect, it means, well, you could push it to 3, it might want water every 2-ish weeks, but you could push it to 4, 5, 6, and it's probably not going to, again, it's like us. We're resilient creatures. We can be pushed to a limit, but don't push us over that limit, because then there's no coming back, or we're just not the same. But snake plants are a really good one, Sansevieria. Okay. They're also one of the highest rated in terms of air purification. Now, that's something that people ask us a lot about, is well, which plants purify the air better? All plants purify air. That's how they breathe, so, but snake plants are sort of known as one of those that take some heavy metals and other, crummy things out of the atmosphere that we don't love. The reality is you need to surround yourself in a forest of them to really feel a benefit of that. But, snake plants, are one of those really good. I sort of, again, like to say, treat them like concrete and they'll be fine. Water every 2 to 4-ish weeks. They can also handle lower light. So if you don't have this great big bright sunny window, they're a really good choice. If you're just, I'm not really sure how my light will do here. What's the other? ZZ plants are another one. Again, can tolerate a pretty wide range of conditions. Also enjoys drying out in between waterings. And then another, and also can handle the lower light. So again, no matter the light you have, you can kind of put them just about anywhere. And then another cute little one is called Marimo moss, which is actually a type of algae, but it's sort of a little sphere about this big. It comes in a little, basically, vessel filled with water and some gravel on the bottom. And I sort of joke they're the new pet rock, because they literally will just hang out in the water and sort of bobble around. And the only thing you need to do is pick it up and swirl it once a week just to mimic water currents. And change the water out maybe once a month with distilled or rainwater. Otherwise, it just literally will just sit there and just kind of bubble. It's the chillest thing, but it's green and it's growing. So, and again,
that life.
It has life. Exactly.
And that's why I love plants. They all have their own personalities. And I don't know, when you start to collect more, some require more care than others. Others are just kind of content to exist, and you check on them every now and then. But yeah.
I like that comparison to people too, especially the part where you're like, and they'll never be the same again.
It's very true. Well, and even that to, in terms of plant collecting, like, I think people sometimes maybe assume that like we have this incredible, personal collection of plants. We have like half a dozen, but we don't live in this jungle because I go to work in a jungle. So like I can only take so much of that home with me. And my personal speed is I'm a thrives on neglect plant parent. Like you have to be able to take care of yourself, or like if I forget about you for a week, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
Like you have to be that plant in my house, especially if you're an indoor plant, because again, this time of year, like the outdoor plants are calling me. Like it is nice. I want to be outside. I want to be with them. So it's like, you need to live about 6 months on autopilot, and then I'll come back to you in the winter when I need like something to do.
All right. You mentioned pests briefly. What are some effective tactics for helping getting rid of pests? Maybe I know this might apply more to when you're growing food, but avoiding things that are going to affect the actual fruits of what you're growing.
Totally.
What's your advice with regards to that?
Biggest thing, again, there's a lot of parallels between plants and people. And so what any doctor would tell us in terms of how to keep yourself healthy, keep yourself healthy, eat good foods, good in, good out. So making sure that the plants are something that I hear very, very often is people aren't fertilizing. Growth takes energy. And if you're again, it's like us. If I drink a water bottle all day, I'd be really hydrated, but malnourished. So you need nutrients and you need food. Plants are the same, especially indoor plants that are growing in a contained environment, in a vessel with no fresh soil, no access to leaf droppings, animal poop, dead things that would rot down. They don't have a nutrient cycling system in the way that they would out in the wild. So fertilizer is a really big key thing to keep plants healthy. If they're more robust, they're going to be able to fend off pests and pathogens a little bit better. That said, also when we're growing indoors, it's a controlled environment, which means natural predators that might come in to eat the pests aren't there. So that is also the one tactic where if you do notice certain pests on your plants, you can actually buy beneficials, and they just come in these little packets. You open them up and they're like dust. I mean, they're so tiny. They're not going to fly around your head. They're not going to annoy you. They'll just literally find the problem, eat it, and then kind of let you get back to your life.
Yeah.
You can also mechanically remove it. So like wetting down a towel with alcohol or neem oil and just sort of wiping down your leaves. That's not a bad idea for cleaning your leaves in general, because leaves get dusty inside and they can't, they can't get light to their leaves. They can't photosynthesize. Again, that's how they generate food. So like polishing our leaves is not just a glamour tactic. It's actually like an important plant care thing, but like every 3 to 6 months probably.
Okay.
But again, if you have an actual pest outbreak, treat it. And again, if you're checking on them once a week, being on top and isolate that plant. Like if you find an issue, pull it out from the others. If it's growing with something, quarantine it until you figure out what it is, what's going on. And also please don't bring it into our plant shop.
Has that happened before in the past?
Yes. Here, I have this thing that's covered in pests and I brought it into a plant shop. We're like, great, let's take that outside. We don't need patient zero in here.
Let's take this outside.
But people are welcome to send us photos, texts, emails. Hey, this is a thing. I don't know what it is. There's plenty of apps out there now that'll help you identify pests too. So, but quarantine first, ask questions next.
Okay. Are there any good apps you recommend?
Picture This is one that I really like. That does a pretty good job, and it will recommend, here's what we think it is, and here's how we treat it. So you kind of get 2 for 1 with that one.
Are there apps for identifying plants like in the wild too?
Yep, and that one will do it as well.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Nice.
I just use like Google. They have this feature now. You just take
Really?
a picture and then it's like, I don't know, I think it's called Google Lens. And it just tells you what anything is. So as I moved into my house this spring, new things are popping up. I don't know what they are outside. And so I'm like, what is this? And so I take a picture, look at it, and then that identifies it. So it's very insightful.
I am always wondering in the wild. And then also like, what's poisonous? What can I eat?
Totally.
All I remember is the leaves of 3 and leaves of 4 thing. I don't even remember what the rhymes are.
Leaves of 3, leave it be.
Okay, there we go.
That's your poison ivy.
Leaves of 4, eat some more.
Yep, definitely. You did ask about sort of edible plant care too for pest treatment. I would say same rule applies. If the plants are healthy, they can sort of repel most things. Mechanically removing things is your second step, and then reaching for chemicals is like your last resort. Like there's definitely other things you can do. Chemicals are sort of like, this is out of control. It needs to go away, otherwise it's going to ruin everything again. But like using that as your last resort rather than the first thing you reach for, just sort of retraining ourselves a little bit.
And are there any chemicals or pesticides that you absolutely recommend against?
I mean, that gets into sticky territory only because people have a lot of there's a lot of feelings and emotions tied to them.
I imagine.
I mean, you could take it extremely literally, like this is what's on the label and this is what it says. I think 9 times out of 10, a lot of the issues we run into is people don't read the label or follow the safety instructions. You know, I think my guidance is follow the safety instructions. If you're not sure, we have great county extension officers too, and they're even in a better position than we are to offer guidance on that. So in Indiana, of course, that's through Purdue. Michigan, it's University of Michigan. Every state has a land-grant university with an extension office, typically in either a county or a region, and you can go to them and say, I have this weird exotic pest that I've never seen before. How do I deal with it? And a lot of them have like insect and disease diagnostic labs. You can actually send samples to them for like $10. They'll identify it for you, tell you how to treat it if you're not sure what it is. But they can also provide guidance on best practice for herbicide use or pesticide use. But again, it depends on your level of comfort, your level of training. You know, certain things consumers really shouldn't touch or have access to. But there's other things where just because it's sold at Lowe's, you can grab it off the shelf. It doesn't mean you can just spray it around your house. Like read the instructions.
Okay.
So,
all right, this might be moving a little bit more into gardening, into the, harvesting, planting things. What do you need? What are the basics? I guess this applies to any plant. What are the basics you need for soil and nutrient? I was looking things up and I was getting like potting mix, which is different from potting soil. I don't know what all these things are. What are the first steps?
And you're asking for outdoor plants?
I guess, is it different for which one?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
So biggest thing, and again, the biggest difference between indoor and outdoor is, indoor plants, we're trying to recreate an environment where they normally are growing that isn't native to our region. So again, we have tropical plants and succulents. These are coming from deserts and jungles and Mediterranean regions. That is not the Midwest. So when we're doing that, we're trying to think about, where would I find these if I were to trek down into the jungle? Where would these be growing? Plants growing on the jungle floor, for instance, are growing in big bark and leaves and chunky things. It's not this really fine, soil. So like monsteras, philodendrons, they love a chunky soil because of that. Like that's what they're used to coming through. But it also rains 4 times a day. So they don't, chunky soil that stays relatively consistently moist. Okay. But again, in terms of cacti and succulents, they like free draining, lean soil. So not a lot of nutrients. They're not going to grow super rapidly. They don't want to sit in water. If they sit in water, they're going to rot. So they like a free draining soil. But in terms of outdoor plants, it sort of goes in reverse. You're trying to I like to think about it as matching the plant to your place. So if you have a full sun location with sunny soil, do not try to grow a hosta that likes rich, moist, shady conditions. Yeah. I think a lot of times gardeners fall into the trope of like, well, I really want to grow roses, so I'm going to do everything I can. I'm going to amend my soil and put this up and build a trellis and do all these things to grow a rose. And you're sort of constantly, and no offense to roses, I'm just using them as an example. But, there's a lot of things that could fall into that category of like, I'm going to amend my soil, do all of these things, and then it still doesn't work. Or it's a lot of work to make it happen versus, if we put the right plant in the right place of, I have a sandy, gravelly lot that drains freely, has no nutrients in it. Well, I can't really grow vegetables there without a big uphill battle, but I can grow native prairie plants and they'll be thrilled to be there. Yeah. Again, these are plants that thrive in those conditions in the wild normally. And again, it's like us. When we humans are sort of put in a place to be successful, when we're surrounded by support and, the type of city, the type of town, family, friends, whatever, like when we're surrounded by things that support us, we do better. Same is true for plants.
And I'm guessing that's also going to change with where you live in the world.
Exactly. Yeah.
So there are different zones for different types of plants. I have a few friends who are trying to go grow corn here in Indiana. I'm like, that makes sense.
Definitely, yes.
You should do more of that.
Yes.
Okay, what are some common mistakes that you see, whether it's beginners or more advanced people even, make when it comes to taking care of plants?
Good question. I think...
Like, what's wrong with this plant? Just kidding. This plant looks fine.
It actually does. No, it's looking good. One, I guess, I don't know if I'd necessarily say mistakes. It's so much as... I think the biggest thing is not seeing the plant as a living thing. We see plants as decoration, and that, I think, is the first and biggest problem. I bought this adorable plant to put in my bathroom, but it has no light. And it's humid all the time. Well, or it's like a cacti or a succulent. And it's like, well, again, they're coming from the desert. They like dry, arid conditions. Your bathroom shelf is not the best place. Again, right plant, right place. So, we think of them as decoration or disposable where, if that doesn't, I'll just go buy a new one in 3 months. It's fine. But then on the other hand, certainly in people that come into our shop are would say, oh, I've had this plant for 5 years and it's thriving and it's doing really great, and I had to research it and had to look into it, but I figured it out, and now that I figured it out, it's giving me that, like, I put love into it and it's giving love back, and that's one of those things I think with plants that's so gratifying. It's like, if you give it what it needs, it's gonna reward you. It's gonna give that back. So just not looking at plants as decorative. I mean, even walking across campus here, looking at all the plants, and it's like, okay, those are healthy. Those are, I've seen a little bit, but no diss on campus grounds. But again, it's one of those of, right plant, right place. And how are those plants sort of being loved on? And if they were loved on in a little bit of a different way, it would be a very different story.
Okay.
So everywhere you go, you're like, you can't not evaluate the plants. You're like, oh,
yes.
Yeah.
It's a fun life. Yes.
Okay, you mentioned looking at it as a living thing, not decoration. And we actually did have a question submitted about why even get a plant versus a fake one. Obviously we don't have any light here, so we have this fake one right here. So what would be, this gets more into the philosophy, but why have a plant?
Yeah, so I like to say that plants have superpowers. And so the things we learn while caring for them transcend the gardening. Think of it this way as, yes, you're learning about what a plant needs in terms of its light, its soil, etc. But there's that notion of, one of its superpowers that I like to say is plants remind us we're connected and they help us to connect. So we're here having this conversation about plants, even in the presence of fake plants and real plants. But we wouldn't be around this table if it weren't for plants. We had our annual celebration last weekend at the Botany Shop for our anniversary. Rough head counts between probably 500 and 700 people came out. And, the feedback we got after that through social media, through comments, word of mouth, wasn't, oh, I found this really cool plant today. It was, I saw a friend I hadn't seen in a long time. I met a neighbor that I hadn't seen in a long time. I saw an old coworker. I made a new friend. We have more pictures of people hugging than buying plants. So I think that in and of itself speaks to the power of plants to sort of create safe spaces, to create safe moments for people to be social. I'd never met any of you before today, but we're all here talking and getting to know each other because of a plant. So plants sort of are those social objects, kind of like dogs. If you walk down the street and encounter somebody with a dog, you start to have a conversation, but you're not really talking to them. You're talking to them through the dog. Oh, what's your name? Oh, what tricks do you know? The dog's not answering you. The human's answering, but the dog has sort of facilitated a social interaction, and plants can do much the same thing. So
I'm going to ask the next plant I see what tricks it knows. So.
Yes, you should.
Well, I do think in that...
And it'll just stare at you.
Yeah. I do think in that same vein of the dog or the plant there, it creates this agreed upon space, this common denominator that we're like, okay, we're all here for this and we know that already. Now that that's out of the way.
Yeah.
What's your name?
I think plants too also provide a lot of individual fulfillment to me personally, at least. Like you said, what love that you put into them, they will give that back to you. So for me, that's kind of an individual thing of just putting my care and my time and into making sure that these plants thrive and grow as much as I can get them to. And if I'm doing that the right way, then they'll give that back. Sometimes that results in me giving them too much love, but it's a learning process too. It's just fun to learn and kind of over the years discover how they all individually need care and attention, and super fulfilling.
And frankly, I've never met a plant person who's an asshole. If I can, to be honest, typically if you're a person who loves on plants, or even if you're not oh, I have the biggest collection, even if you have a few and you care about them, and again, if you walk out of this room today and walk across campus and say I'm noticing the plants in my environment now, that's what we need, because we need, there's sort of this notion called plant blindness where, generally most of us can't recognize the plants in our environment. We recognize more brand names than we do plants. Is that an oak tree or a walnut tree? It matters. And this is why, but most of us can't walk out the door and, you don't have to be the world's best botanist or horticulturist or whatever. But if we can identify this many brands, we can identify this many plants. I'd say there's a benefit that comes definitely with the plant side of things.
All right. Well, I think, we've reached the fulfillment aspect of plants. Do you have any last comments or thoughts, things we didn't cover that you find, questions you get a lot about plants?
I mean, definitely what can I not kill? Or what will I have a hard time killing is something we get a lot. Certainly when we're working, and that's for indoor plants. When we're working with outdoor plants, a lot of times it's, People are definitely more sensitive now to, or at least folks coming into our space. I want to provide the maximum benefit to wildlife. How can I do that? What plants are going to, fill that niche? I think people are becoming more conscious and aware that not all plants are created equal. There's just because it's beautiful doesn't mean it's doing good in the world. And, I've even had to struggle with this because certain plants that I just love to grow, I know aren't doing harm, but they're not doing as much good as something else that I know I could be growing. So there's definitely sort of a psychological guilt trip with outdoor plants anymore. But I think it's a good thing we're experiencing this right now because we need to check it and we need to think about it. Because we sort of all have control over, it may just be a space the size of these tables, but if each of us can control a space this large and do something good in it, that's a collective, massive impact.
Yes, and speaking of the psychological effects, we had a question here, I guess, from our producer about the effects of plants on mental health. Have you personally noticed that? Do you know studies that contribute to that?
This is well documented. I mean, you could easily look into this and go a little bit deeper, but you don't even have to be tending plants, just spending time with plants. During the pandemic when we were all on lockdown, what did we do? We went for walks. We spent time in nature. Forest bathing, became a thing really quickly. And again, that's another sort of plant superpower is they help us mark the passage of time. So in the pandemic, for instance, when we didn't know what day it was anymore, and is it a Tuesday or is it a Wednesday? Is it 9 a.m. or 10 p.m.? We can look to our plants and it's they grew an inch this week. So I know time has passed, and I know they grow during the day, and there's something about them that's incredibly grounding. And again, for me personally, I would much rather spend time in the garden than go to a gym if I had to make a choice. So there's certainly a physical element of well-being that comes from just the physical activity of doing it. But also, you go into a garden stressed and spend a couple hours, you're not going to leave stressed. It melts.
Yeah, the passage of time thing is interesting too because we used to have this very large cactus in the office, and I would look at it and remember where it was when I first started my job versus where it was a year later.
Exactly.
Kind of crazy.
It's cool because that specifically went back generations too, and so they can be something more than just something to have in your room for a couple of years. They can be something that grow with you, that get passed down. I definitely see the parallels there to how they improve our space and why we need them just as much as they need us. So.
And now I got to make sure I'm a plant person so I don't seem like an asshole. Well, I think we've covered a lot for plants, but thank you so much for coming on, Ben.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
And thank you, Becky, for guest co-hosting, and thanks to all of you for listening, and everybody standing back there that you can't see. And we'll see you guys on the next episode of Don't Say Adulting. Bye-bye.
Don't Say Adulting is a Grotto Network podcast produced by Jane O'Connor, Kevin DeClute, and Josh Long. Additional production and editing done by Kevin DeClute. Graphics and animation by Becky Rogers. Grotto Network is Director Javi Zubizarreta, Senior Producer Josh Long, Senior Content Editor Jesse McCartney, Art Director Becky Rogers, Senior Manager for Community Engagement Mike Rossetti, Social Media Manager Adrian Garaldi, Web Content Strategist Michaela Douglas, Producer Kevin DeClute, Associate Producer Jane O'Connor. Special thanks to our guest and Notre Dame Studios.